When Vivian slid the demotion notice across the conference table, not a single person in the boardroom spoke for me. She sat at the far end of the long table beneath Meridian Grid's newly installed silver logo. Adrian stood at her right shoulder, holding the minutes against his chest, his expression modest and detached, as though none of this had anything to do with him. Vivian did not call me her husband. She used the name I carried inside the company, Caleb Rowan. Her voice was cool and official. Due to your repeated obstruction of strategic projects and your allegations against members of management without complete evidence, the company has decided to remove you from your position as Vice President of Operations and Risk. She paused, then delivered the rest. You will be reassigned as Northern District Facilities Compliance Manager. It sounded respectable enough. In reality, it was exile. The Northern District role was based far from headquarters. It came with no approval authority, no executive access, and no team of its own. I would spend my days inspecting warehouse fire exits and maintenance logs. My salary would be cut. My department would be dismantled. And the moment the meeting ended, every permission I had used to investigate Adrian's procurement projects would disappear. I looked at Vivian. Was this the board's decision? I asked. Or yours? One of her fingers tapped lightly against the polished tabletop. I proposed it. The majority approved. Several directors looked away. They knew the procedure was questionable. They also knew Vivian was expected to secure our next round of financing. To them, I was not a risk executive raising a legitimate compliance concern. I was a difficult husband refusing to support his wife's leadership. Adrian chose that moment to speak. Caleb, I never asked Vivian to do this, and I'm willing to submit to any reasonable review. I turned to him. Then why have you refused to disclose the ultimate beneficial owner of Blue Arc Advisory? Silence settled over the room. Adrian's expression did not shift. That information is private to the vendor, and disclosure is required by company policy. Enough. Vivian cut in. You've repeated the same accusation for 3 weeks. Blue Arc helped us deliver the East Line Transit project on schedule. Adrian coordinated every resource. All you've delivered is another warning. Did you read the payment anomaly report I submitted? Yes. Did you read the appendix showing duplicate bank account records? Something flickered in her eyes. Finance said it could be explained. By whom? Adrian. I nodded. At that moment, the last trace of hesitation inside me vanished. I did not shout. I did not throw the file at Adrian. I did not warn Vivian that she would regret this. I picked up the demotion notice, signed the acknowledgement line, and handed a second sealed envelope to Eleanor, the corporate secretary. Please register this under the company's bylaws. Vivian frowned. What is that? A notice triggering the shareholder protection provision. Confusion crossed her face first, then irritation. Caleb, stop using legal terminology to delay implementation. Your reassignment is effective immediately. I know. I rose from my chair. So is the notice. As I walked out, Adrian spoke softly behind me. Some people always think the company can't survive without them. I did not turn around. Soon enough, the board would learn that the company did not depend on my title. It depended on the 60% voting bloc I controlled. Meridian Grid was a privately held urban transit technology company. We supplied fleet dispatch platforms, station security equipment, and maintenance data systems to public transportation authorities. Our headquarters stood in West Haven, a fictional elevated metropolis of light rail lines, suburban rail corridors, union maintenance yards, and strict public procurement rules. It had all the complexity of a modern city, and the most ordinary corporate weakness of all. Ambition moved faster than governance. The board loved growth. Management loved rapid contracts. Compliance, in their eyes, existed only to arrive before the celebration and hand everyone a list of reasons not to open the champagne. Before Meridian Grid, I ran a small engineering studio called Rowan Mobility Labs. My mentor, Owen, and I spent years developing a predictive failure algorithm that could detect risk from vibration, temperature, and service history before a bus or train actually broke down. We had no sleek offices and no talent for fundraising. Vivian, back then, handled government accounts for a transportation software company. The first time she watched our demonstration, she said only one thing: the technology is excellent, but you have no idea how to sell it. She was right. She brought clients, negotiation skill, and access to the market. I brought the core technology, patents, and early operating data. Together, we formed Meridian Grid. Later, we married. The original ownership structure was simple. I held the majority founder stake. Vivian held management equity and options. The rest belonged to employees and early investors. The complication came 5 years earlier, when the company prepared to acquire a dispatch software firm. Banks and institutional investors worried that our marriage created a governance problem. They did not want to finance a company in which I held majority voting power and served as operations chief while my wife served as president. Outside counsel designed a solution. My founder's shares were placed in an independent voting trust administered by Harbor Fiduciary Trust. Under normal conditions, the trustee voted according to predetermined governance principles. I did not interfere with the board directly. The shareholder register showed only that Harbor Fiduciary Trust held 60% of the voting rights. Most directors knew the trust existed, but they did not know who held final beneficial control. That was not illegal concealment. The corporate secretary, outside general counsel, lead lender, and chair of the audit committee all held sealed beneficial ownership certifications. My identity had been fully disclosed for anti-money laundering reviews and loan underwriting. Other members of management were not authorized to see those sealed documents because the entire structure was designed to prevent daily corporate decisions from appearing controlled by a married couple. Vivian knew I retained my founder interest. She had signed the prenuptial and governance disclosures herself. What she believed was that the shares could not return to my direct control during the trust term. She had never read the protection clauses closely. Those clauses provided that if the company concealed the material related party transaction, retaliated against a risk reporter, or unlawfully stripped the founder of compliance oversight in order to suppress an investigation, the trustee was required to suspend the ordinary voting arrangement. Once outside counsel confirmed that a trigger condition had occurred, voting control reverted immediately to the beneficial owner. In ordinary times, I was just one executive among many, but if management removed me from risk oversight to bury an undisclosed conflict of interest, 60% of the company's voting power would come back to me. I had not slipped that clause into the documents in secret. It was written into the financing agreement, the trust instrument, and an exhibit to the bylaws. At the time, Vivian had complained that the paperwork was too long. When her attorney explained the trigger mechanism, she asked one question: will this interfere with my authority as president? Not if the company follows related party and anti-retaliation procedures. He had answered. She signed on the spot. For 5 years, I never used it. Not when we argued as husband and wife. Not when she bypassed me on strategy. Not when the board gave her more authority. A majority stake was not a weapon for settling a marriage dispute. It was a safeguard meant for genuine governance failure. Adrian's rise was what finally pushed Meridian Grid toward that failure. He had started as Vivian's executive assistant. He remembered every director's habits, who drank coffee without sugar, who hated long reports, and which bad news should be saved for the final 5 minutes of a meeting. Vivian admired his efficiency. A year later, she promoted him to strategic projects assistant. Eventually, he began coordinating vendors and public sector contracts on behalf of the president's office. Adrian had no formal procurement authority. What he had was access to everyone who did. That was more dangerous. Blue Arc Advisory was the vendor he introduced. It claimed to provide crisis coordination teams for public transit projects. In reality, it had existed for less than a year. It had no permanent employees, no public case studies, and a registered address inside a shared office suite. Adrian insisted Blue Arc had the government relationships and field resources we urgently needed. Vivian approved an emergency procurement waiver. The East Line project was facing delays. A normal tender would take at least a month. Blue Arc promised a solution in 2 weeks, and on the surface, it delivered. Long-stalled permits were suddenly approved. Several subcontractors signed within days. The schedule recovered. The board was delighted, and Vivian credited Adrian. Then I reviewed the monthly payments. The same category of field coordination charges had been split across multiple invoices, each just below the secondary review threshold. The invoices used different project descriptions, but every payment went to the same bank account. More troubling, Blue Arc's insurance certificate came from a brokerage that no longer legally existed. I first approached Megan, our finance chief. The president's office requested accelerated payment. She told me, every invoice has project confirmation. Who confirmed them? She pointed to the system. Adrian Cross. He doesn't have authority to confirm procurement delivery. Megan lowered her voice. Vivian gave him temporary authorization. Is there a board record? I haven't seen one. I did not accuse anyone of fraud. I followed procedure and issued an enhanced due diligence request requiring Blue Arc to disclose its ultimate beneficial owner, actual personnel, original insurance documents, and any related party relationships. 3 days later, Adrian came to my office with Vivian. She put the review form on my desk. Stop this investigation. Why? The East Line project is at a critical stage. You'll scare off the vendor. A legitimate vendor won't walk away because we ask it to disclose ownership. Adrian sat beside her. Blue Arc's investors value privacy. They've worked on sensitive public projects. They won't reveal their identities. They can disclose confidentially to outside counsel. The business team never has to see it. He smiled. Caleb, you treat everyone like a suspect. I treat anomalies like anomalies. Vivian looked at me with open impatience. Blue Arc delivered results. Results do not replace process. And process cannot become an excuse for failure. She stood. You have 48 hours to withdraw the review. If you don't, I'll reevaluate your position. That was the first time she explicitly threatened my job. I did not withdraw it. I submitted everything to Helen, chair of the audit committee. Her response was cautious. Please attempt to resolve this with management first. She did not want a confrontation with Vivian before financing closed. So I kept gathering records I was legally authorized to access. I did not hack Adrian's computer, read his phone, or hire anyone to follow him. Every document came from systems within my role. Procurement records, payment data, vendor files, and meeting minutes. The metadata on several Blue Arc invoices showed Adrian's corporate email initials as the document creator. That meant he had edited the invoices before they entered the procurement system. A hotel reimbursement claimed Blue Arc had paid for an out-of-town coordinator. The hotel confirmed the registered guest was Adrian. A vehicle rental charge occurred during his personal vacation. None of that alone proved fraud. It was more than enough to justify an independent investigation. The most important clue came from bank account validation. The address used to open Blue Arc's receiving account was in the same residential building as Adrian's old mailing address from his employment records. I had no authority to inspect his personal banking information. I did not need it. The vendor's account opening file belonged to the company, and the duplicate address flag had been generated automatically by our own system. I documented the alert and attached the supporting records. Vivian still refused to initiate an independent review. Instead, she approved a second procurement waiver proposed by Adrian. This one was larger. I refused to sign the risk approval field. That refusal led directly to the board meeting where she demoted me. The decision had not been sudden. It was the inevitable result of every time she chose visible results over internal controls. She needed Adrian to prove her strategic success. My report threatened to prove that she had driven the company into an undisclosed conflict of interest. So she chose to remove the author of the report. My access badge was downgraded minutes after the meeting. My assistant packed my personal belongings into a cardboard box. The team that had reported to me was told it would now coordinate through Adrian. Some colleagues looked sympathetic. Most looked away. Power inside a company often changes faster than the official announcement. When I carried the box into the headquarters parking area, Vivian was waiting beside my car. She had removed the jacket she wore in the boardroom, in a white blouse. She looked more like my wife than the executive who had just destroyed my position. Caleb, let's go home and talk. About the company or the marriage? Both. I put the box in the trunk. For company matters, contact my attorney. Her expression tightened. You really filed the shareholder protection notice? Yes. That clause doesn't apply to you. Why not? You're only one beneficiary of the trust. I studied her. Who told you that? She did not answer. I understood. Adrian had probably searched the public shareholder register. He saw Harbor Fiduciary Trust holding 60% and assumed I was merely one beneficiary among several. He did not know about the sealed ownership certificate. He told Vivian what he believed. She accepted it because it was comfortable. Tomorrow, I said, you'll receive a formal explanation from outside counsel. She stepped closer. Do you have to turn our marriage into a shareholder war? You were the first person to use our marriage inside the boardroom. You treated my professional judgment as a husband's resentment. I did not. If the same report had come from someone who wasn't your husband, would you have demoted him? Her lips parted, but no answer came. And if Adrian weren't standing beside you every day telling you he understood your pressure, would you have let an executive assistant bypass procurement controls? Her face went cold. You're jealous of him. That sentence ended any chance that I would go home that night. I'm staying at a hotel. Caleb, do not contact me. The next morning, outside counsel for Harbor Fiduciary Trust arrived at Meridian Grid. Eleanor, the general counsel, Helen, a lender observer, and several directors attended. I did not. The initial trigger determination had to be made by lawyers independent of my control. At noon, Daniel, the trust's lead counsel, called me. The trigger conditions are satisfied. The trust has suspended its ordinary voting arrangement. Your voting rights have been restored to direct registration. Does the board know? The formal notice is being read now. I stood by the hotel window as rain moved across West Haven. I felt no triumph. The shares had always represented my founder interest. But the fact that I needed them back meant the person I trusted most had pushed the company to the point where the protection mechanism had to be used. Daniel continued, the board has requested an emergency shareholder briefing. Vivian's counsel has objected. On what basis? They claimed the demotion was a normal personnel decision. Outside counsel has pointed out that it was directly tied to an unfinished related party review. The minutes also show Adrian participated in the presentation concerning your performance. I closed my eyes. That was the most obvious procedural failure of all. The person benefiting from the disputed transaction had helped advocate for the removal of the investigator. No independent director could explain that away. That afternoon, Eleanor issued notice that every director was required to attend a special meeting the next day. Vivian finally called me. This time, I answered. She did not bother with a greeting. You control all the voting rights held by Harbor Trust? Now I do. Why didn't I know? You knew I retained my founder interest. What you didn't know, or chose not to remember, was the trigger language you signed. Her breathing sharpened. 60%? 60. The silence on the line lasted a long time. For the first time, she understood that the man she had demoted was not a husband she could push to the edge of the company. He was the holder of its controlling vote. But I had no interest in turning the situation into a cheap identity reveal. So I spoke first. I am not removing you tomorrow. She sounded genuinely stunned. What? I will require the board to establish an independent special committee. It will investigate Blue Arc, the demotion process, and Adrian's conflicts of interest. I will not participate in the factual findings. If you did nothing wrong, the committee will clear you. After a pause, she said bitterly, am I supposed to thank you? No. I simply refuse to do what you did. I won't use power as a substitute for evidence. She ended the call. The special meeting lasted 4 hours. For the first time, I sat at the opposite end of the table as the company's controlling shareholder. Every director's manner had changed. It was not because they had suddenly discovered respect. It was because the shareholder register had been updated. Capital structure has a way of teaching people new manners. Eleanor read the trust termination notice into the record. Under the protection provisions executed during the financing restructuring, Harbor Fiduciary Trust has terminated the independent voting arrangement after confirming management interference in a material related party review. 60% of the voting rights are now directly controlled by Caleb Rowan. Across from me, Mark went pale. He had voted in favor of my demotion. I was never told Caleb was the sole controlling beneficiary. Outside counsel answered evenly. You were authorized to know the percentage held by the trust. The final beneficial control certification was maintained by the corporate secretary, outside general counsel, and the lending institution. That was consistent with the confidentiality framework adopted at the time. Before a trigger, ordinary directors did not require access to personal beneficial ownership records. Helen looked at me. Why did you never exercise control in 5 years? Because the trust existed so the company would not revolve around our marriage, I said. I did not want every decision Vivian made to be treated as something her husband ordered. And I did not want people agreeing with my risk assessments simply because I held the majority vote. Vivian sat rigidly at the table, her face drained of color. At last, she understood. I had not hidden my shares so I could one day humiliate her. I had voluntarily placed my power in the hands of an outside trustee so she could stand before investors as an independent president. And she had used that independence to protect Adrian. I introduced 3 resolutions. First, the formation of a special committee made up of independent directors and an external forensic firm. Second, the immediate suspension of Adrian's access to systems and vendors, while continuing his base salary during the investigation. Third, no automatic restoration of my former position until the committee evaluated whether my return would create a conflict. I did not demand Vivian's removal. I did not ask the company to freeze her private property. I did not insist that the scandal be made public that same day. Shareholder rights were not instruments of private revenge. Mark leaned forward. With 60%. You could reorganize the entire board right now. I could. Then why not? Because every conclusion would be dismissed as marital retaliation. The company needs a process that employees, clients, lenders, and regulators can believe. The resolutions passed. Not because I made a dramatic threat, but because outside counsel, the lender observer, and the directors, liability insurer all made the same point. Refusing to investigate would multiply the company's exposure. When Adrian was notified that his access had been suspended, he lost his composure for the first time. He stopped me in the hallway. You planned this from the beginning. From the beginning. I asked for disclosure. You knew you controlled 60%. But you pretended to be an ordinary executive. I never said I didn't. The shareholder register never concealed the trust stake. He lowered his voice. Vivian is going to hate you. You should worry about Blue Arc. He gave a thin smile. You have no proof I profited from anything. That's why the committee is investigating. You won't get what you want. I want the facts. Wherever they lead. His eyes narrowed. Even if they lead to Vivian? Even then. That evening, I returned home. Vivian sat alone in the living room. There was no dinner on the table. Only the governance disclosure documents we had signed when we married. She pushed one page toward me. This says you retained a beneficial founder interest. Yes. It doesn't say you could take back 60% of the vote. I turned to the exhibit. It does. She stared at the dense pages. My attorney didn't emphasize this. The meeting notes showed that he explained the protection trigger. You asked whether it would affect your authority as president. Her eyes slowly reddened. You always thought I didn't deserve to know. No. I always thought you did know. You simply never treated it as important. That isn't the same. You made me look like a fool in front of the board. I met her gaze. Before you demoted me. Did you seriously read my report? She did not answer. When Adrian explained Blue Arc. Did you require independent verification? Still nothing. When you sent me to a warehouse position. Did you consider that I might be right? She finally broke. Because you always think you're right. Her voice rose for the first time. You sit there in that calm voice and tell everyone where the risk is. The board listens to you. The employees trust you. Clients care about your technology. I'm the president, Caleb. But the moment you frown, everyone assumes I'm reckless. For the first time, I heard the wound beneath her anger. This was not only about Adrian. For years, she had lived beside my founder status and technical reputation. Even after I placed my voting rights into trust, even after I refused to interfere in her sales and personnel decisions, she still felt that the company's foundation belonged to me. She wanted to prove she was not a president elevated by her husband. Adrian understood that hunger. He told her, again and again, that only she had the courage to make bold decisions. He told her I only knew how to protect what we already had. Vivian needed that validation, so she interpreted Adrian's recklessness as loyalty and my scrutiny as a power grab. You're allowed to feel overshadowed, I said. You are not allowed to tear apart the company's controls because of it. Tears slipped down her face. Are you going to remove me? That depends on the investigation. You can't even say you won't? If the evidence shows that you retaliated against an investigator and concealed a related party transaction, I cannot promise to protect you. She stared at me. I'm your wife. At the company. You're the president. You used that title to demote me. The words landed harder than I expected. After a long silence, she asked, and our marriage? I need a separation. She did not ask me to stay. She only closed the disclosure file. Page by page, I moved into a short-term apartment. The house belonged to both of us. My voting control did not give me the right to throw her out. Our lawyers arranged temporary housing costs and household expenses. Most of my founder's shares were premarital property, but appreciation during the marriage could still be subject to division. 60% voting control did not mean Vivian would leave a divorce with nothing. Real law does not erase a spouse's property rights because she made a serious management mistake. I accepted that. The corporate investigation did not end quickly, either. The forensic firm first imaged the procurement platform and company email archive. Every access request was authorized by the special committee. I never privately searched Adrian's accounts. The committee obtained Blue Arc's onboarding file, payment chain, authorization logs, and every version of the contracts. The first finding was that Blue Ark's ultimate owner was not an anonymous investor. It was an LLC called Crossfield Holdings. Its manager was Liam, Adrian's maternal half-brother. That relationship had never been disclosed on the vendor conflict form. The evidence did not come from a miraculous witness. Corporate registration records, Blue Ark's tax documents, and the emergency contact Adrian submitted when he joined Meridian Grid all corroborated one another. The second finding was that Blue Ark had not performed most of the field coordination work it billed us for. It subcontracted the work back to firms already operating on the project. Their original quotes were far lower than the amounts Blue Ark charged Meridian Grid. The difference flowed into Crossfield Holdings. The third finding was that Adrian had edited vendor invoices. Archived emails showed that Blue Ark sent blank templates to him. He changed project descriptions and amounts before forwarding them to the procurement inbox. The fourth finding was worse. Vivian had authorized Adrian to use her electronic approval token for urgent documents while she traveled. She claimed it was an efficiency measure. Company policy explicitly prohibited the sharing of approval credentials. The logs showed several procurement waivers signed during hours when Vivian was attending a formal dinner. She could not have operated the token herself. Adrian had used it. Vivian might not have known that he altered invoices, but she had voluntarily surrendered a control designed to prevent exactly that abuse. It was serious supervisory misconduct. The committee interviewed Adrian first. He appeared with his own attorney. At first, he denied knowing that Liam controlled Blue Ark. Investigators produced a corporate registration amendment listing Adrian as the filing contact. He changed his story. I only helped a family member submit administrative paperwork. I had nothing to do with operations. The committee showed him the invoice metadata. He changed his story again. I only helped the vendor format its documents. Project teams confirmed the amounts. As the evidence closed off one explanation after another, he began shifting responsibility to Vivian. All emergency procurement was ordered by the president. I only executed her instructions. He claimed Vivian knew Blue Ark belonged to Liam. He also claimed she demanded that he keep the East Line project on schedule at any cost so she could prove her growth strategy to the board. When Vivian heard that, she contacted me directly for the first time since the separation. We met in a lawyer's office. She sat across from me looking exhausted. Adrian says I knew Blue Ark was his brother's company. Did you? No. Did you know Adrian had helped register it? No. Did you know he was editing invoices? She shook her head. I only knew he could solve problems. And that was enough for you to give him your approval token? I had more than 10 meetings a day. He was only completing documents I had already approved. Did you review the final versions? She closed her eyes. Not all of them. I did not need to ask anything else. Caleb, she said quietly. I made a mistake. Yes. But I never took a kickback. I believe you. Hope appeared in her eyes. I've already told the committee there is currently no evidence that you personally received money. I continued. That does not erase your responsibility for retaliating against the investigator or handing away your approval authority. The hope disappeared. You still want me removed. I want the process to decide. If I lose my position, then we're truly over. The fracture became impossible to ignore when you demoted me. Her fingers trembled. I thought you'd only be angry. I thought you would still clean up the company afterward. That was more honest than an apology. She had always believed I would never leave. Every previous crisis had trained her to believe it. When a system launch failed, I worked through the night with engineering. When a client challenged our data, I gave the technical presentation myself. When financing due diligence uncovered old contract defects, I produced the founder files and explained each clause. Over time, she began treating my support as if it were part of the building's infrastructure: electricity, water, servers. Something noticed only when it stopped. What you've lost, I told her, is not my willingness to defend you in a meeting. It's the support you assumed could never end. Tears ran down her face. Can we finish dealing with the company before we talk about the marriage? The company will be handled. The marriage does not get to suspend facts. The investigation entered its second month. Lenders demanded explanations of the governance risk. Several public clients paused new orders, not because I had deliberately paralyzed Meridian Grid, but because public procurement agencies saw a severe conflict among the president, the risk executive, and the vendor. Their natural response was to reduce exposure. Cash flow tightened. Some directors urged me to become interim president to restore confidence. I refused. I am both the controlling shareholder and the person connected to the original report. Taking over now would weaken the independence of the investigation. Instead, I nominated Rachel, an outside operations specialist, as interim chief operating advisor. She had worked on both sides of the industry, inside transit authorities and private vendors, and had no ties to the factions inside Meridian Grid. The board approved her appointment. Rachel's first act was not to cut jobs. She froze every emergency procurement waiver and required key vendors to be recertified. Projects slowed. The company paid service credits for delayed delivery. Profit fell. So did shareholder value. I owned 60%. No one lost more on paper than I did. But continuing to hide the problem for the sake of a quarterly report would have created a far greater loss. Employees began to talk. Some said my divorce from Vivian was destroying the company. Others claimed I had deliberately driven down its value so I could reclaim control cheaply. Meridian Grid was not publicly listed. There was no market price to manipulate. But the internal valuation had fallen, and employee options were worth less. I did not release a long statement. At an all-hands meeting, I said only this: the investigation will follow procedure. No one's marriage, title, or ownership can replace evidence. The company will not punish employees because of the controlling shareholders' emotions. It will not bypass review because of the president's rank. An employee asked whether I intended to sell Meridian Grid. I have no such plan. But first, this company must prove that it still deserves the trust of its clients. During his suspension, Adrian began approaching directors. He offered to provide evidence in exchange for legal fees and a promise that the company would not pursue him. The special committee refused full immunity. It agreed only that he could submit materials with counsel present, and that his cooperation would be documented in the final recommendation. Eventually, he surrendered a private phone. It contained messages between him and Vivian. Some helped her. She had repeatedly asked him to confirm that vendors were legitimate, and ordered him not to exceed approved budgets. But far more of the messages revealed how deliberately he had played on her insecurity. The board only understands Caleb's language of risk. He wrote, "You need someone who puts results first. If you let your husband veto every major project, they'll never see you as the real president." Vivian had replied, "I won't let him correct me in front of everyone again." In another exchange, Adrian asked, "What if he keeps investigating Blue Arc?" She answered, "I'll change his position." That message directly tied my demotion to the investigation. The committee gave the material to her lawyer. Vivian did not deny it. In a supplemental statement, she admitted she had feared my report would weaken her authority before the board. She believed removing me from headquarters would allow the project to continue. She still insisted she had known nothing about Adrian's fraud. I believed she had never participated in the money, but she knew she was suppressing risk. She had simply renamed that suppression leadership. In the third month of the investigation, Liam agreed to cooperate. Not because he suddenly developed a conscience. After the bank restricted Blue Arc's account and unpaid vendors began pursuing him, Liam discovered that Adrian had pushed many decisions onto his shoulders. He refused to carry all the liability alone. He produced draft contracts and a profit allocation schedule. The documents showed that Adrian was supposed to receive a share of Blue Arc's profits through future consulting fees. The money had not yet been paid, so it would have been inaccurate to claim he had already taken company funds, but it was more than enough to establish an undisclosed financial interest. The materials were referred to the commercial crime authorities. The company had no power to declare Adrian guilty. The board could terminate his employment, seek recovery of improper payments, and cooperate with regulators and law enforcement. Criminal responsibility belonged to the legal process. Before the special committee released its final report, Vivian offered to resign. The board did not accept immediately. She still had the right to respond to the findings. She came to my apartment alone. A notice at the entrance clearly disclosed that audio monitoring was active. She glanced at it, then stepped inside anyway. "I'm preparing to resign." "That's your decision. Will the board remove me if I don't?" "They'll vote after the report. You control 60%. I will recuse myself from factual findings concerning your individual responsibility. At the final shareholder vote, I will act according to the report." She gave a bitter smile. "You always have to be so correct. I made mistakes too." "What mistakes?" "I treated silence as support. Every time you bypassed procedure, I repaired the damage first. I thought I was protecting you. What I actually did was teach you that no matter what happened, I would stay." She looked at me for a long time. "Will you stay now?" "No." Her eyes reddened. "Because of the company?" Because you knew I was performing my duty, and you used resentment from our marriage to turn me into your enemy. Demoting me was not merely an error, it was the choice you made when power and trust came into conflict. She sat in silence. Then she said softly, Adrian made me feel as though I didn't need you. After I truly lost you, I realized that every risk I ever dared to take was possible because you were behind me. At last, she understood what my support had been, not because she discovered I controlled 60%. The shares shocked her for a few days. What truly hollowed out her life was that I no longer attended client meetings, corrected her board reports, left a light on when she came home late, or turned her mistakes into problems we carried together. She had not merely lost the controlling shareholder. She had lost a man who had spent years placing her ahead of himself. If I hadn't protected Adrian, she asked, would we still have ended this way? Not this quickly. Is there any chance left? I shook my head. I can forgive you, but I cannot entrust my marriage again to someone willing to sacrifice me whenever she needs to prove her authority. She lowered her head. I always thought you would never leave. I know. That is why you dared to send me to a warehouse, I said. She had no answer. Before leaving, she placed the house key on the table. We'll handle the property the way the lawyers recommend. I won't claim your premarital founder shares. You still have legal rights in marital property and marital appreciation. I'm not trying to be generous. I know. She looked up at me. Caleb, I am truly sorry. I accept your apology. My decision remains the same. She nodded. This time, she did not ask me to reconsider. The special committee issued its final report. It found that Adrian had concealed a related financial interest, altered vendor documents, misused delegated credentials, and interfered with an investigation. Meridian Grid terminated his employment, sought recovery of part of the money paid to Blue Arc, and referred relevant materials to law enforcement. The report found no evidence that Vivian personally received any benefit. It did find that she had seriously violated approval controls, allowed a subordinate to use her signing token, ignored warnings of a related party transaction, and retaliated against the executive who requested review. The board met to consider her position. I had not participated in the factual determination, but at the final governance vote, I was required to act as controlling shareholder. Vivian did not ask me to spare her. Through counsel, she submitted her resignation and acknowledged responsibility. The board accepted her resignation as president. She retained management shares that had already vested. Her unvested options terminated according to the plan. The company did not seize her private property. No dramatic declaration left her penniless overnight. What she lost was her position, future bonuses, professional reputation, and our marriage. Those consequences came from several independent decisions layered on top of one another. I did not become president. After an external search, the board appointed Rachel permanently. I became executive chairman and joined the technical governance committee. My authority was greater than before, but I no longer ran daily operations. The bylaws were amended. A president's assistant could no longer hold undocumented procurement coordination authority. Emergency waivers required approval from 2 independent executives. Any vendor connected to an executive's family or close associate had to be disclosed to the audit committee. Any change to the role of a risk reporter required independent director review. The rules were not monuments to my victory. They existed so the next person would not need 60% of the vote just to make a report visible. It took nearly a year for Meridian Grid to rebuild client trust. We lost a major public contract. We paid for forensic audits, lawyers, and system remediation. Employees left. Valuation declined. My own wealth fell with it. A controlling shareholder bears the largest share of the loss. That confirmed what I had known from the beginning. Triggering the protection clause was not a cost-free act of revenge. It was an emergency brake. It could keep the train from leaving the tracks, but everyone inside the carriage would still be thrown forward. The divorce moved just as slowly. Through separate lawyers, Vivian and I divided our home, savings, and investments created during the marriage. My premarital founder shares remained mine, but part of their marital appreciation had to be valued under local family property law. We hired financial experts. In the final settlement, I paid her a reasonable equalization amount. She did not lose her marital property rights because of misconduct at work. I did not take on every consequence for her simply because I had once loved her. On the day we signed the divorce papers, she wore a plain dark coat. There was no executive assistant, no driver, and no meeting waiting for her. She watched me sign. The first time you placed the shares into trust, she said. You did it so I could become a real president, didn't you? Yes. Why didn't you explain it more clearly? At the time, we both thought it had been explained. Afterward, I avoided raising it again because I didn't want you to feel that the company belonged to me. She gave a faint, wounded smile. And in trying to prove it belonged to me, I forgot everything that actually belonged to you. The company never belonged only to me. Employees, clients, and other shareholders all carried its risk. But control belonged to you. Control does not exempt anyone from procedure. She studied me. That is the greatest difference between you and Adrian. He always said rules were things weak people used to protect themselves. You had enough power to crush all of us. And you still formed a committee first. I said nothing. Tears gathered in her eyes. I don't regret this because you had 60%. I regret it because I finally understand why you refused to use it. You were always giving me room. I mistook that room for weakness. I closed the file. I hope you never make that mistake with anyone again. Will you marry again? I don't know. Will you think of me? Yes. The good parts and the bad. She nodded. That is enough. We left the law office and separated at the elevators. There was no embrace. Neither of us turned back. A few months later, I visited the Northern District Facilities Station for its annual inspection. It was the same place Vivian had intended to send me as punishment. The station manager looked nervous when he saw me. Chairman, you didn't have to come personally. I used to do this kind of work. Several warehouse lights were aging. Temporary equipment blocked part of a fire lane. The problems were less dramatic than a boardroom struggle, but they affected real employee safety. As I crouched beside an old control cabinet, a young engineer asked, "Did you really almost become the manager here?" Almost. I heard it was a demotion. I examined the wiring. There is no shame in the work itself. The problem is using a job to punish the person who raised the concern. He nodded seriously. I entered the findings into the compliance system. I did not bypass the process merely because I was now the controlling shareholder. Rachel later told me Vivian had found work in corporate training. She no longer managed a large company. She taught small and mid-sized businesses about executive delegation and accountability boundaries. Some people believed she had no right to teach the subject. Others believed that someone who had made a serious mistake and accepted the consequences understood better than most how such mistakes happened. I offer no opinion. Her life no longer required my approval. Adrian's legal case continued. The commercial crime unit did not convict him merely because a company report accused him. Lawyers disputed whether he truly controlled Blue Arc, whether promised consulting fees constituted a financial interest, and whether Vivian's authorization had made his conduct appear legitimate. That was how real law worked. Evidence had to be tested. Responsibility had to be separated. I did not spend my days chasing every update. Meridian Grid pursued recovery through civil proceedings. Blue Arc eventually agreed to return part of the improper charges. Liam accepted responsibility for his role. Adrian reached a regulatory agreement barring him from public procurement work for a period of time. He did not become homeless overnight, but he lost the rapid advancement and industry reputation he had wanted most. That was the proper weight of the facts. At the shareholder meeting 1 year later, Eleanor read the ownership structure again. Caleb Rowan holds 60% of the voting rights. This time, no one looked surprised. I sat at the center of the long table and remembered the day of my demotion, when everyone believed all I had left was a warehouse compliance job. I had held control of the company all along, but the shares were not what finally made me stand up. What changed me was the moment I stopped believing that endless tolerance would eventually teach the person closest to me to respect my boundaries. After the meeting, Helen approached me. "You could have removed everyone on the day of your demotion. Why didn't you?" "Because I wanted to prove the report was true. I didn't want to prove that I had more power." She nodded. "The company moves more slowly now." "Yes, but it's steadier." "Steady isn't an insult." I smiled. Vivian had once hated hearing people call me steady. She believed my stability dimmed her brilliance. Now I understood that stability was not the absence of strength. It was having strength, and still agreeing to be examined. It was being capable of overturning the table, yet placing the evidence on it first. It was holding 60% of the company without turning the company into a battlefield for my marriage. At dusk, I left headquarters. The silver logo still glowed above the entrance. Employees streamed through the revolving doors. Some hurried toward buses. Some unlocked bicycles. Others stood at the curb discussing projects. The company continued to operate. It had not vanished because a marriage ended. It had not become a private kingdom because its controlling shareholder stepped into view. That was what I had wanted to preserve. Not the position Vivian once gave me. Not the respect the board later returned to me. Not even the satisfaction of watching Adrian lose what he had tried to steal. I preserved a company that could still deserve to exist after every fact had been exposed. At home, I opened a drawer in my study. The trust documents from 5 years earlier lay inside. Their pages had begun to yellow. Vivian's signature was on the final page. I remembered her leaning against my shoulder after she signed. "Won't it bother you to hand your power to an outside trustee? As long as the company can grow," I had told her. "It doesn't matter who sits in front." Later, she forgot those words, and I forgot to remind myself of the condition attached to them. It truly did not matter who sat in front, but the person in that seat could not treat everyone behind them as disposable steps. I returned the documents to the drawer. Beyond the window, West Haven's lights stretched across the night. A city train glided along the elevated line. No passenger could see the sensors beneath the floor, the control modules inside the walls, or the maintenance algorithms watching every vibration. Yet those unseen systems were what brought the train safely to its destination. For years, I had been the same. I stood behind Vivian. I repaired systems. I absorbed risk. I locked my power inside a trust so she could stand before the world as president. She believed I had no light only because I never turned the spotlight toward myself. I no longer needed to prove anything. The bylaws knew who I was. The shareholder register knew what I owned. And at last, I understood something about myself. Loving someone can mean giving her room. It can mean letting her stand in front. It can mean surrendering the applause. It cannot mean surrendering your dignity, your duty, and your boundaries along with it. Vivian demoted me to protect Adrian. Only afterward did the board discover that I controlled 60% of the company. But those shares were never what cost her everything. She lost it through every choice she made between power, truth, and our marriage. And what I won back was not Meridian Grid. It was the right to stop paying for choices that belonged to someone else.